Okay, so start with, so,
Okay.
like, when and where you were born.
Well, I was born on August 20th, 1934, to Eva and Gus Olander in Wyandotte, Michigan. My mother and dad and their whole family, plus which my mother's maiden name was Eva Cebula, Cebula, and the Cebula family and the Olanders family were both religious Catholic. It seldom missed a Sunday Mass. So I asked my mother why she named me Bernard or Bernard, and she said, well, I'm named, by the way, there was 5 kids in my family. No, there wasn't at the time. There was 2, me and my brother Edward, who was 2 years younger than I was. He was born in 36, I was born in 34. And my mother told me that she named all her children, and at that point it was just 2 of us, Bernard and Edward, by the Catholic calendar. And sure enough, when I was a teenager, I pulled out the Catholic calendar and looked up August 20th, yep, St. Bernard's Day. I looked at my brother's date of birth, October 6th. Sure enough, St. Edward's Day.
Where were your parents from? So
my parents were from Wyandotte, Michigan. They met something like I met my wife. I knew my wife before, but I met her at a wedding, and my mother and dad met at a wedding. My mother was very similar to my life. I was almost 23 when I got married. My wife, Patricia Mazurek, who comes from Wyandotte, Michigan, she was almost 20 when we got married. While my mother and dad were just about the same thing. My mother was 19, my dad was 22 when they got married. They lived in Wyandotte. When they got married, they told me there was a depression back then, in 1934. Things were bad, and they had to live with their parents for a couple of years. My grandparents, Cebula, who I was very close with.
And Cebula is your mother's side.
My mother's side.
Yeah.
And I was closer with my mother's side than I was with the Olander side. And the Olanders came in 1910 from what I was able to find out from a town called Kolno, Kolno, which is near the German border in Poland. My mother's side, Cebulas, came from Warsaw, Poland, in 1912 and both settled in Michigan.
So both your parents were from Poland?
Yes.
The Cebulas and Olanders?
Olanders, yes. They were both from Polish. They spoke Polish fluently. And till their passing, I remember, they spoke broken English. And at one point, I could speak fairly decent Polish when I was young, but then as you get older, become a teenager and so forth, you don't speak it as much. One of the things I'd like to say was on the Cebula side, all my uncles who I was close with, 5 of them, they all passed away of heart disease before they were 56. None of them made retirement. My dad never made retirement. I can't remember what year he got killed, but he got killed in a 1-car accident at age 61. My mother lived to be 7 years old. She died from some complication of lung disease.
Wait, do you remember what year she died?
No, I can't remember. I'd have to look it up. I don't remember.
So why do you think your family settled in Wyandotte? So your grandparents, did your grandparents settle in Wyandotte from Poland?
No. Poland, yes. I mean, Cebulas, yes. Cebulas came directly from New York to here. The Olanders came earlier, 2 years earlier, 1910. They settled in Syracuse, New York, because they had a cousin from Poland living there before they arrived. And he vouched for them, and they settled in Syracuse for a couple of years. He was able, my grandpa Olander, whose name was Thomas Olander, he saved a couple bucks, and since he grew up on a farm, he wanted to be a bean farmer. Navy beans, white beans.
So your grandfather wanted
My grandfather wanted to be a farmer. He took his money that he made the first 2 years of his life in Syracuse, not his life, but living here in the United States. He took his savings and he bought a small farm, 40-acre farm in a place called Ubley, Michigan, which is in the thumb of Michigan, which is a nowhere town. I've been there once. Anyway, he bought that farm. He paid whatever he had saved up. I never heard that, but I do know that he had a $900 note with a bank in Ubley, Michigan. And when the Depression hit, he couldn't make his payments. Everything just stopped.
So that was Tom Cebula?
Thomas Olander.
Thomas Olander.
Cebula were farmers. The Olanders were. And he had lost all his savings. The bank took the property over. In the meantime, they had a cousin that had settled in Wyandotte, Michigan. So when they got kicked out of that farm in Ubley, Michigan, they moved to Wyandotte. That's how they wound up in Wyandotte. Whereas the Cebulas came directly from the boat, New York, right to Wyandotte, because they had a relative living in Detroit by the name of Sapelax. I visited them when I was maybe 8 years old, but it was some relation to Cebulas, but I never knew what it was. It seems like the old country people, my grandparents, both sides, they never said much about their life in Poland. The only one ever told me anything about Poland was my grandma, Barbara Cebula. She was brought up on a farm outside of Warsaw. She worked in a bakery at 15, and at 16 she met my grandpa, Stanley Cebula. BSO Interview, I know. Crazy thing. Anyway, she told me when she was growing up in Poland how poor everybody was, you know. And they lived on a farm, and it pretty much, if they didn't grow it, they didn't eat it, you know. Their, you know, it was terrible what she was telling me. There was their barn was nothing but a dirt floor, you know, with a thatched roof, where they had some chickens, and didn't have any cows or horses or anything like that. It was all poultry, chickens and ducks. And I do remember she was telling me that when she worked in a bakery, she had great respect for the Germans. Now, again, this is 1910, because he came here in 12. So in the early 1900s, she worked in a bakery in Warsaw. And she said the German soldiers, especially the officers, were strict, disciplined, you know, spit and polish. You never see them out of, you know, crumpled shirt or anything. Whereas the Russians would come in and buy pastry and bread and that. Soldiers, she said they were crumply and crude. She didn't like Russians. My grandma, Cebula, Barbara Cebula. And they just wanted a better life. So she met Stanley Cebula, who was, at that time, he was he come out of school, a trade school. He learned to be a shoemaker back then. You know, you get a piece of leather, and he knew how to run a heavy-duty sewing machine, and he could make shoes. So he was like a middle class in Poland at that time. Where my grandma Barbara Cebula, her maiden name was Szendrowicz. I don't know, Polish or whatever it was, but that was her maiden name. I remember that. Siendrowiczy, Szendrowicz. So they settled in Wyandotte. He got a job with Wyandotte Chemicals.
And your parents were born in the States?
Yes, they were. My dad was born in Syracuse, like I told you. Olander settled in Syracuse with a cousin. My dad was born there. The Cebulas settled in Wyandotte, Michigan from the start, and my mother was born in Wyandotte, Michigan. As was I, and my brother, Edward. But my early recollection of, my family, we were very close with the Cebulas. Like I say, I had 5 uncles, all great guys, loved to hunt, They all smoked but one. Vic Cebula, Nancy Cebula's father, wasn't a smoker, but the other 4 smoked, which now you find out doesn't help your health at all. But I was close with those guys. I used to shine their shoes. Like I say, I was the oldest of 15 grandkids at that time. And I remember staying at my grandmother's there for a couple of years. I must have been more than that, because I was like 5 years old. I can remember the house distinctly. I could, describe the house where they lived on Oak Street.
Yeah, start with that. What are your, so they settled in Wyandotte.
Yeah.
Your extended family settled in Wyandotte.
Yeah.
And so what are your first memories
of
being a young child?
My first memories of being a young child, one of them was, they had like a 4-bedroom house. My mother and dad had a bedroom, and till I was 5, I pretty much slept in a crib. I remember climbing out of a crib
Because they didn't have any.
Why? They didn't have a lot of money. Everything was frugal. Back then there was no welfare for anybody. They were big churchgoers, but church never helped them at all. They just got by what they could do, and they were hard-working, God-fearing people. I remember that. That's why when I used to hear Polish jokes when I was older, it used to piss me off, because I know how hard they work, especially Cebulas. The Olanders, after that depression, losing that farm, my grandpa Thomas Olander was kind of defeated. He had no ambition to do anything, although he got a job in a steel mill in a warehouse to make money, but they never had much. Where the Olanders were more not aggressive, but more, what do I say? I don't know what the word is, but they were just more, saving and working hard and getting ahead where the Olanders weren't. Kind of my grandpa Thomas. Now, the Olanders were with the kids, closer with the kids than the Olanders. We'd go to the Olanders once in a while on Sunday for dinner.
The Cebulas were closer with the kids,
yes,
you're saying?
They were more, with the kids. My grandpa always, would talk to me and give me a dime or a nickel, and he never drove a car, by the way. In fact, both Olanders, both grandparents, never drove a car. My Olanders never owned a car. Thomas, and her name was Frances. My grandmother Olander was named Frances Olander. The Cebulas now, Stanley, he bought a car when he had saved some, again, they were progressive, they saved their money. They bought property over in a place called Taylor Township when I was a boy. It's out in the sticks, we call it the sticks. and it was like 10 miles west of Wyandotte proper. And it was off of Eureka Road, I remember. And after they got a few bucks, and I was 5 years old, things got better with the U.S. economy. Everybody was working good. The Depression was over with. Still, there was no welfare. Welfare did not come in. I remember because my mother and dad told me about it. The welfare didn't come in till the 40s. And that's when the welfare came in for low-income people. But when my mother and dad got married, again at Cebula's, didn't have it much, so they never got a wedding gift. So when they got established and started saving money, they bought 40 acres over in where I'm saying, Taylor Township, and gave each child 2 acres. No strings attached.
So that was your parents?
My parents and my uncles and aunt. I had one aunt, Lillian Cebula. Each kid got 2 acres of land from their parents as a wedding gift instead of money. I mean, we had a big wedding. One thing about the Polish, they had a hell of a big wedding. It lasted like 2 days. So I do remember that. Hotter than hell, no air conditioning back then. And we'd go to a relative wedding, and it was just, good, a lot of polka music naturally. Mm-hmm. Anyway, at 5 years old, I remember my mother and dad went to look at her 2 acres, and my brother was 3 at the time, and him and I were running along this creek. There was a creek where they owned the property south of the creek. And we were running along this creek, just looking around, bare land back then, and there was a damn snake in the path, garden snake, but scared the hell out of me, and I was first. And my brother was second, and I said, "Oh my God, snake," I remember that.
So that's one of your earliest memories, being out.
That, and I remember sitting in Cebula's, because back then a lot of the there was a 3-story house Cebula's had. The old Linders had a 2-story house. No, they had 3 stories too, but smaller. And Cebula's had a stairway going down, and all the cooking, I remember, washing clothes, and all the canned goods they were able to buy back then, a small refrigerator, everything was down in the basement. So everybody gathered down there, listening to radio. There was no TV at that time in the 40s, early 40s, and it was 30s then, because I was 5 years old, and if I was born in 39, born in 34, in 1939, I remember that. My brother would go to bed, because like I say, he was 2 years younger than me. He would go to bed quick, and I couldn't sleep that one time, and all the folks were downstairs talking, having a beer. Vodka was big with the Polish people, like with the Russians. I remember they never had whiskey. There's always a vodka, and I remember when I got older, like maybe 8, 9, 10, my grandpa Cebula gave me a little taste of vodka, and I didn't care for it. It never was my special, but as I got older, my dad gave me a shot of whiskey. I like whiskey. Anyway, I remember sitting on those steps, and then I heard somebody coming, because the steps were like, you go down the steps to a platform, and that was the door going out into the backyard, and naturally back then everybody had a garden. All the Wyandotte people had a garden. Mm-hmm. So you went there, then you had to make a right turn from the steps going down to another 5 steps. There was like maybe 10 steps going down. And there was a platform with a side door. And I remember the side door too, because it didn't have locks like they do now.
Okay, so you were saying some of your first memories of being
I remember 5 or 6 years old, my mother and dad got gifted 2 acres of land in
Right.
Taylor Township. For some reason, they didn't want to stay in the city. I never asked why. I wish they would have, because eventually, a year later, after my recollection of that property and the snake that we saw by the creek, they built a basement and 2 stories house out in the country where my brother and I grew up, and it was tough. We didn't have many friends back then. That was just all vacant land.
Do you remember the streets?
Oh yeah, it was on Merrick Road off of Eureka. And right off of Eureka and Merrick Road right this minute, or was a Holiday Inn there. But we were like 1/8 of a mile off the road, which is, the main road is Eureka, it's still there. And I still remember my address. And I left home at 23 when I married.
What was your address?
15485 Merrick Road, Taylor, Michigan. Still remember that, you know?
Yeah.
Like my Navy number. I mean, I haven't been in the Navy, what, 50 years? More than 50 years. I still remember my Navy number, 437-0699.
So you remember being out in...
So anyway, they built the
America.
house. We have no running water, no inside toilet. You know, we had a tub where you took no shower, a bath, you know, maybe once a week back then. And the outhouse was there for, God, till I was a teenager before they got running water in a septic tank. So I grew up in that house, my brother and I. Because my brother and I were like 13 years, maybe 14 years older than my 3 sisters who followed later. And I didn't know my sisters well, and I still don't. My favorite sister, Barbara, who's the oldest girl, she passed away at 56 from heart disease, didn't take care of herself, way overweight, smoked, living way up in Upper Michigan, up in Eagle Harbor, which is by Michigan Tech. Who knows why they moved up there, but when they got their inheritance from my mother and dad, they took that 20 grand and moved up north. So, and it's a rough life. I was up there several times. Once by myself, I flew up to visit her, and 3 times my brother and I drove up there. In fact, that one year we deer hunted. There's big deer up there, but I never saw any. So we stopped going there, and we went back to the Cebula side over at Gaylord, where they got 160 acres, and I've hunted there for 50 years. But anyway, growing up, it was tough because I remember my dad would have to get up early in the morning. He worked at the steel mill in Ecorse. Well, from where our house was to Ecorse steel mill was probably 25 miles, maybe 30. So what he would do, he would get up early morning on a day shift, wake up my brother and I. We'd have to get up, have a quick bowl of cereal, jump in a car. He would drive to a Catholic school in Wyandotte, which is, by the way, where I met my future bride, Pat Mazurek. And we'd sit there in the hallway for maybe half hour, 40 minutes before the nun would come with the key to open the door.
Oh, so you guys got there that early?
Yeah, it was terrible, you know. Parents don't think. At least mine didn't. Because even my sisters, Barbara, who I was close with, the oldest, when I first flew up there to see her, because there's a flight up there to Houghton, kind of the college. I went from Detroit to Escanaba, Michigan, a mail drop, then I continued on to Houghton, Michigan, way up in the Upper Peninsula. And we got talking over a drink one evening, and she started crying. We were talking about our childhood, what we remembered. And she started crying. And I gave her a big hug. I said, Barb, you don't have to cry. I know it was tough. Our parents didn't think anything like that. what they were doing to us. I said, my brother and I, you know, they'd drop us off and we had to sit there in the dark, you know, till the nuns came in, put the lights on, and went in the classroom.
And
we
you
did
were
that.
the only students there?
Several,
You
yeah.
were the only kids there?
Only kids in the hallway waiting for the school to open because my dad had to go to work. He never missed work. I'll say one thing about Gus. He never missed work. Not till he got, I mean, like 30-some years in. He finally missed a day. He had the flu. Die hard, unbelievable. Wasn't much around the house. Didn't like to paint. Didn't fix up much. But damn, he never missed work. And where was I?
So that's.
Oh, she had the same thing. You know, they dropped her off with her sisters. There was two younger ones after her. My mother had two girls, like she had my brother and I, 2 years apart. She had 3 girls, 2 years apart. So they were in the same predicament. My brother and I were in. My dad would go to work, drop them off, you know, all by himself, you know.
What was the age gap between you and your sisters?
13, 14 years. Because in the meantime, my mother had bad health. She was told not to get pregnant.
Oh, really? When she
had bad lungs. She was spitting up blood, I remember. And that's why I stayed at Cebulas a lot, my brother and I. You know, my
when
dad
you were growing up, you guys stayed at your...
Yeah, because her mother took care of her off and on for a couple of years over in Wyandotte from the house that they built in Taylor Township, you know, because she was so sick. She would cough up blood. She went to some Jewish specialist in Detroit that told her that, you know, you've got a rare lung condition. The Michigan weather, with the humidity and up and down, cold and hot, is not good for you. You ought to consider moving to Arizona. Oh, I remember that. She told me that. But, you know, what do you do when you need money? My dad was, you know, he was solid with the steel mill. He worked his way up to like he wasn't a superintendent, but he was like one step below, you know. And he used to roll steel. I mean, he had a lot of, he worked his way up. He made good money towards the end. Then he screwed up by getting killed in a car wreck. A year from retirement. Anyway, that's why I say I was close with Cebulas, not so close with the Olanders.
So those are some of your early memories growing up,
yeah,
and staying,
that,
you know, when you
like,
were a young kid?
Yeah, because like I say, I was in the first grade. You know, you imagine a first grader, 6 years old, you know, and my brother was 2 years behind me, so I was by myself.
5, yeah.
Yeah. My dad would drop me off. I'd have to sit there at the first grade because we had 2 levels in school, you know, 1 to like 6, and then, you know, 6 to 8, then you went into high school. But, you know, 6 years old, all by yourself, you know, Dad tells you, go to your classroom, sit down, wait for the nun. He didn't call them nuns, sisters. Mm-hmm. Wait for the sister. Mm-hmm. And it's a traumatic. Well, that's what happened to Barbara, too, and it hit her. And, you know, girls are more, we all think we're even on the emotions and that. And a lot of broads do too, but they're not. They're just made female. We're a male. They're more delicate, more emotional than you know what men are. And I felt so sorry for her because she was reliving, you know, when she was young and my dad would drop her off and she was by herself, 6 years old. Terrible. Why they stayed in the country, I don't know. You just get a, you know, like a hard feeling, you know, I mean a hard outer shell. You don't want to think about stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I should have asked him, why?
Yeah.
You know, even though the land was free, 2 acres free, you know, why the hell did you have to, you know, bring up kids out here in the country? We had no friends for years until I was a teenager.
Really? That was...
Yeah. The only friends I had was in school. And like I say, they all lived in Wyandotte. There was only maybe 6, 7 of us that lived out in Taylor, you know. Their parents either picked them up or there used to be a bus that ran later on. When I was a teenager, you could catch a bus and they would drop you off at Eureka, and then you had to walk 7 blocks to the school. I remember doing that quite a bit. But at least, you know, by then I was self-sufficient and, you know, 15, whatever, 14 years old. It was tough growing up with people like that. And my mother was, a great cook. She never smoked. She never drove a car.
So she was a kind of a homebody?
Just a homebody, She was kind of a, if I had to describe her, good mother, good gal, but she was like an introvert, As she got older, she didn't associate with her sister-in-laws, because there was big families, both sides, there was like 5 Tabula boys and 1 girl, so that's 6 at Tabulas.
So she had 5 brothers?
She had 5, my mother had 5 brothers and 1 sister.
Wow.
The youngest one was a sister Lillian, that my wife, your grandmother, Pat, didn't like. And yet Lillian was the one that taught me how to do the polka and the 2-step, because my mother nobody ever taught me that, but my aunt, who was, well, I don't know, she was only maybe 6, 7 years older than me. And as I got to be a teenager, and thinking about girls, she said, Bernie, you gotta learn how to dance. Girls love to dance. So I said, well, how do you dance? So she puts a record on in her house, which is my grandmother's house. And I remember that, her teaching me, she said, well, you gotta do this, now follow the music, and wash my feet. And little by little, I caught on. But I remember her for that. And she was nice to me, because when I started dating a couple of girls before I met my wife, I dated a couple of girls in school. She would let me use her car. My dad, no way in hell.
Oh, really?
He'd give me his car. He was always worried I was going to wreck it and he's going to miss work. And, well, like I say, his big thing was work. That's his whole life was make sure he got to work. So and he never bought a new car. Gus Olander never bought a new car. It was always a used car. And after a year or 2, he started having trouble. We're always in a garage waiting for a car to get fixed. True story. I remember that. And there was no mechanic there in Taylor where I grew up. We had to go to Wyandotte. There was a garage about a block from Sabula's house. Because the Olanders, by the way, lived more downtown. They were close to downtown. Where the Olanders, Sabula's, were closer to the western limits of Wyandotte. Where the Olanders weren't. Olanders actually were in a town, in the city, a section of it that they called Ford, F-O-R-D, Ford City. And it was a lot of Polish there, mostly Polish, 80, 90%. And it's funny how the classes lived, because in the middle of town, opposite Ford City, it had no name, but it was all Irish. And that's where Grandma dated a couple of guys from the Irish school, St. Patrick's. We went to a school called Mount Carmel, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which is a big thing in Poland. But interesting life.
So you described your mom as an introvert.
Yes.
How would you describe your dad?
Well, my dad was a party guy, and my mother held him back. That's my opinion. He loved to travel. He loved to party.
Did you have memories
But
of
my mother didn't. In fact, the night he got killed, he was coming from a wedding, and he drank too much, I would say, in my opinion. I was a cop then. And my mother wouldn't go, because she knew how he got together with his brother Chester. Gus and Chester, out of the 6 kids from the Olanders, my aunt and uncles, there were 6 of them.
So your mother had 6 siblings?
Yes.
And then your father had 5?
No, father had 6 or 7.
Oh.
Yeah. And the closest to him was an uncle who was a very nice guy. Chester Olander, very nice guy. A class guy, Because I used to, as I got older, as a teenager, I used to wonder what a difference between, Uncle Chet, who's, sharp dresser, and I always thought a lot of him, and my dad, who was kind of a, so what, I got baggy pants, no big deal.
Yeah.
That attitude. That's funny how you get perceptions.
Yeah.
And I remember growing up that. So anyway, you live and learn, and I got over that.
So what were some of your early memories of school then?
Well,
Being
I had one incident, and I seldom told anybody about this. I was in the first grade, and I had to walk, you imagine 6 years old, almost a mile, close to a mile, from a school to Tabula's house, which is west. And one particular afternoon, as class got dismissed, they had big closets back then. I remember you had to hook up your, clothing. And, the nuns were Polish, from Poland, very strict. And you didn't dare talk or, get out of line at all. Well, anyway, that particular day that I remember, we were coming out of our closet, and I don't know if it was a kid ahead of me. And back then, I was, say to me, I was shy. I didn't make friends easy. Somebody was talking. This nun, big tall broad, she thought I was the one. And she went like to slap me, or to hit my head, while her ring, because, all those nuns wore ring for Christ, had caught my forehead here and started bleeding a little bit. So when I got home, my grandpa, who was in Polish, is called Jaja. Jaja is a Polish word for grandpa in Polish. So I come home and my Jaja says, in Polish, like, co to, like, what happened to you? And I can't remember all the other words, but co to is what happened. Mm-hmm. And I told him, in Polish, siostra was sister, translated into sister to siostra in Polish. And I knew some of the words back then. And I told him, she hit me, and she did. And that told you they didn't drive. Oh, he drove to work a mile every day. It was a bike.
Your
Sabula.
What was this again? Your grandpa?
Grandpa Sabula. He'd go from his house a mile or more to downtown, which was on the river. Back then, Wyandotte had a lot of chemical plants. Penstall Chemicals, Wyandotte Chemicals, BASF Chemicals. He worked for Wyandotte Chemicals, which is a tie-in to BASF. We had to walk all the way. After I walked home, I had to walk all this until my dad picked me up. I waited at Sabula's house. At first grade, my brother wasn't there. It was just me. So I'd wait there, and my dad would come get off work at 4 o'clock, pick me up, and go back to the farm. We called it a farm, where Ed and I grew up. Anyway, Grandpa didn't drive. We had to walk all the way back to the damn school, to the priest house. And my grandpa was raised in hell. More or less, I understood some of the Polish, because all the priests were Polish. And he was telling the priest that he didn't send his grandson, me, to school to get hit by a nun and cause that injury on his.
Oh, so he was sticking up for you.
Oh, he was really pounding that priest. So he said, well, calm down. I'll call the sister. So he radios up the nunnery, we call it the sister house. She comes over, she denied everything. Now here's a nun, supposed to be a teacher of God, not owning up to what she did. She said, oh no, something must else happen. I didn't do that. And I remember distinctly.
And you distinctly remember that?
I remember her standing there with that big old, and she was tall. I can't remember her name, but Grandma knew her, because Grandma had her too later on, because Grandma was 2 years behind me. And she was just a bitch. But anyway, it shows you what.
That's a distinct memory.
Oh, hey, I was only 6 years old in elementary school. And she denied that. And later on when I think about it, I said, what the hell kind of nun of Christ is that? Okay, she screwed up. It was an accident. But I mean, she did try to, because she thought I was talking. It wasn't me. There was a kid either in front of me or behind me that she heard. And back then, our classes were like 35, 40 kids, all lined up in a row that she had to take care of back then.